stream key.
Oh yeah, do you need it? Yeah.
48-hour art check. Round 138.
138. We're feeling great. Okay.
I like how all of a sudden you're a cheerleader. You just turned into. We're having this super serious conversation, and then you jump into cheerleader mode right as we go live.
I love it.
There we go. We've got Peter Palmetti. What's up, man?
Peter, how's it
Yeah.
going? Yeah.
So, okay, let's do it.
Let's jump in.
All right. What have you gotten done in the last 48 hours?
All right, so my crappy thumbnails. I guess the first thing that's showing up. Well, anyhow, crappy thumbnails for the next page of quarterly stories, and it's going to be kind of a weird page with like hovering bodies of water. I'm imagining a lot of characters in each level of water. It'll make more sense when I get to roughing the pencils.
Okay.
And then I did the rough layout and text for it. And then I also did this like tattoo pattern thing for a client. So I have to do another one of those with a slightly different theme tonight. And it's kind of a top secret type thing. So I'll mention it if it's up on their thing for sale or whatever. But until then, that's just a little sneak peek at it. So yeah.
Cool. Looks good.
Yeah.
So I have got almost nothing done. I recolored this, and then I'll talk about everything. Just very little, very little. But I'm planning on a lot of organization on trying to get people to do stuff for the Kickstarter. But yeah, not a lot, not a lot.
Yeah, I've seen you though on Facebook, pretty active with that. It is hard to rile a group of people to execute anything,
Yeah,
which once again always makes me really admire Mike. Like
yeah,
there was some confusion with the edits on the anthology where they had asked me to edit some stuff, and I edited it, and then uploaded the files, and the files somehow got lost, and it was all this back and forth. And I realized like this poor guy is having to deal with this with every single contributor because it was a problem with like the Google Drive or whatever that it was all being uploaded to. So I was like, just quantifying like my own experience with him times what, like 28, and I was
right.
like, that's like, once again, there is a reason a lot of people who like edit comics, like edit an anthology, like never do it again, because it's like a huge undertaking dealing with that many personalities, and especially when it's like a passion project, so nobody's doing it for money or anything like that. That's a hard thing to wrangle.
Yeah,
So tip of the hat to you for doing a mini version of that, and a tip of the hat to Mike for handling that whole thing.
yeah, and a larger tip of the hat to Mike and Marshall and Gaz and all those guys, because
Yeah,
my way of handling it is if you get it in on time, you get to be in the video, and if
yeah,
not, well, I'm just going to edit what I have. So
yeah,
it's fine. So like the book will still get made, whether
yep,
or not I get 28 people in the video or 15. So
yep.
we'll see. But yeah.
So if you're out there and you're in the hundreds anthology and you haven't done your video yet, the cutoff time is tomorrow. So do it like tonight. Get it in tonight, because anytime tomorrow could be too late.
To be clear, the cutoff time is before I get home from work tomorrow. So
Yeah.
that's when I'm going to start ripping stuff. Yeah. But anyway.
And we aren't going to say the time that he gets home from work. Just get it in tonight.
I work 90 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Just kidding. So anyway, we got a super active chat already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Chris is here. Hey, Chris. Squatchy's back. Yes.
Yeah. Right. So how about challenges for you?
Oh man. Challenges are mostly challenges I can't talk about. I think we're probably both in a similar boat with that. And then just like I had a cold, so like I had to call out yesterday, but there's computers that had to be serviced in my department that I had to take to an Apple store because our IT's out of town. And like that sucked up my time, even though I was sick, and just having to like sleep off getting sick and then like get back on the horse today, even though I'm like still kind of kicking it. And then also just absurdly noticing that like this whole year has been insane for getting sick. Like I haven't had a year where I've gotten sick almost every month except this year.
Yeah.
And it's something that like really annoys me, because I'm like, I'm making more progress on being healthy. I'm working out more actively. I'm like, much better with like getting sleep and regulating that. And yet for some reason this year, it's like, just, it feels like the school my son is going to is just like a contagion unit. And my son comes back and just spreads these diseases all over the house.
It's all those anti-vaxxers, man.
I don't know, man.
You're gonna get
outbreaks in LA.
You're gonna get polio, the measles, and the bubonic plague this year. That's what's gonna happen.
I get so pissed about this because it hit really close to home for us, like that specific thing. There were like 4 people in the Antelope Valley area that like went shopping at our local Home Depot. And I was like, dude, I used to go to that Home Depot when my son was of the age where he couldn't be vaccinated. And you would have just given my son measles. Thanks a lot, asshole. Like, pardon me for the language, but it just makes me so mad. It's like, just like literally, guys, come on, let's read science. It's not that bad. Science is not bad to study. The way vaccines work is not super crazy, but we all have to do it or we all don't. But anyhow, it makes me really mad.
So, yeah. Okay. So anyway,
that was my anti-vax rant. I know we do a vaccine-based podcast and show here.
I just want everybody. There's a huge amount of restraint on my part right now so that we can stay on task, because I just want to go down that rabbit hole so bad. But anyway, that has nothing to do with what we want to talk about today.
I concur.
Yeah. So anyway, what was I going to say? Yes. Challenges for me. Weird challenge. I got home yesterday and was oddly exhausted. I don't know why exactly. Like nothing's different. And maybe that's why it's exhausting. And I sat down in my chair at 8 p.m. and I woke up at 1 a.m. and went to bed. So that was yesterday. And then today, my son just wouldn't go down to sleep. And so that was like till like 8:30, 8:45. And then the power went out. I finally got down. I opened up a Photoshop file. I got 3 different things done real fast. Like I was on a roll. I was firing. And then the power went out. And then we started the show after the power came on. So that I don't know what you would categorize any of that in, but more life stuff, I guess, is happening.
Yeah.
I cannot get. It's been a few days of like this like start stop. I am used to making a significantly higher amount of progress on projects, and I feel like I am just inching along and barely gaining any ground. And it's like, I'm not sick. nothing significant is really keeping me. It's just death by 1,000 cuts every night this week has been, yeah, it's been nuts. So yeah. Anyway.
That's a tough place to be in. I've been there, so I get it. And it is tough too because it's like you put so much time into doing these extra things that like the exhaustion just kind of piles up too. Whereas like you won't even know, and then you sit down and you wake up and it's 1 a.m. You know,
Yeah.
it's like that kind of thing. It is a byproduct of this kind of like productivity thing. So
Yeah.
I'd say just roll with it. And like part of it's probably also you don't have the thing, like the pending thing, like
Right.
on your lap right now. You have that thing tomorrow.
Right.
And I have a really strong suspicion you'll knock it out of the park the second you have that like small achievable goal like right there, And that's actually not too small actually as a goal because that's going to be hard to put together, I think.
Yeah. It's, I was tweeting and was it Ox? I think it was Ox that I was tweeting with. And I was, I was just saying, you ever come up with a really good idea and then immediately upon thinking about the idea, you think that's like 10 times more work than just doing it simply? But it's a really good idea. That's what this video is. I really feel like this is the right thing to do for the project because I think it's really going to help. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody would have known any different if I never told anybody this idea and I just said, yeah, we're just going to deliver, this script over the top of some B-roll of the pages and then we'll be done.
But that's the fun of like personal projects, right? Where you're actually invested in it because you can do that crazy idea and there's no like bean counter to kind of go, wait a minute, how expensive is that going to be
Right.
to do?
Yeah.
The only downside is like the expense is your time. And so like that's the tough thing. I just had that with this thumbnail. I mean, it looks really simple, but the thumbnail I did for the next page of Quarterly, it's like it's gonna be a nightmare to create because I've just roughed in like 3 characters or whatever, but I'm having these weird levels of floating water with all these monsters on them, and it's just like it's just gonna be a ton of work to execute. And in my head, I know it, even though I have this thumbnail that looks relatively simple. Um, and I've done that multiple times on this book, and been like, I could have done
Yeah.
it's like talking heads, have this done in a week.
I think this is going to spill into our topic a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's good. How about plans? What are your plans for the next couple days?
I want to have a good start on the rough pencils for this page for the very reasons I just kind of touched on. So I don't need to really retread it. Just it's going to be complicated, and so I'm not going to set myself up for disappointment by saying I'll have the rough pencils entirely finished. But I want to at least have 1 or 2 of those water levels, and then the basic structure of it set up. That would be good.
Cool.
Yeah. What about you?
So my plans are I got to wrap my head around to this video. So tomorrow I will be downloading hopefully 28 videos from 28 different creators, and then I need to watch them all. And some of them are 6 minutes long, and some of them, who I won't call out specifically, did a really good job, but it was also a 28-minute long video. So there's a few that went long, and which is from an editing perspective is like awesome, because then I know I'm gonna get something good because they did the take like 5 times, and I know I can piece something really good out of that. From the other perspective, 28 times however many minutes, you always multiply it by like 10 to 20 about
Yeah.
is how long it takes to go through it, because I can't just watch it. I have to like take notes on like time codes and in and out, and make sure that anyway. So yeah, I'm now just complaining. It's a great idea and I'm really excited about it. It's going to be a ton of work, and I don't know I don't know how long it's going to take me, but there's a very strict deadline that I'm putting on myself because I want to get it in and done way early, so that it is in no way, shape, or form a holdup on the Kickstarter, and give myself enough room for it to blow up and fall apart, and all the kinks and weirdness that can happen. Um, so anyway, so that's just what I'll be doing. But I'm going to go through the footage, and I'm going to get a rough cut of the narration.
Nice.
I don't know if I'll do that in the next 48 hours, but I will make progress on that in the next 48 hours. We'll see how long it takes.
Yeah.
So
I think that'll tie well in our topic as well.
yeah. So
Cool.
all right. Yeah. So I'm curious. Okay, before we get started in the topic, we've got like more people than we normally have in the chat. So I want to kind of prep you guys, because I want to include you in the show.
Yeah.
So in the chat, tell me um, tell me what motivates you. Like, most of us that watch this show, most of us that are part of the communities that we're all involved in, um, we are doing way more work than we're required to. There's like a bunch of extra effort that we put in. Um, Life would be way easier if we did a few things differently, but we've chosen this road. I want you to let me know why why you do that and what keeps you going. Those are the two things, and then well, Josh and I will try to include that in. So that's what we're looking for from the chat. Other than you guys hanging out and talking to each other, that's great. So keep doing that. Okay. Today's topic is that unteachable thing. And
Yeah.
Josh and I were talking. We've both taught college, in different universities and at different times, and we were just discussing. There's kind of like three types of students, right? There's one type of student who shows up and just is going to succeed no matter what, and not because they're super talented, but because they refuse an alternative to success. They are going to destroy any obstacle that comes in their way. They're gonna work until they get it done. They're gonna do whatever it takes. There's another type of student that is the polar opposite of that. That no matter what the teacher or the school or the classmates do, they are bent on their own failure. um,
Yeah.
and then there's the student in the middle. And the student in the middle I find really fascinating because they can kind of go either way. They're kind of on a tipping point, and in the right situation, they just knock it out of the park, and they do super super awesome stuff, and they succeed, and they all that, and then with some slight tweaks, bomb hard.
Yeah.
Not necessarily grade wise, but from an effort standpoint, or from a quality standpoint, or whatever. There's something where like, I've looked at these students and I've been like, I've had you in other classes and you were like amazing, and I hold up the work that you did as an example to other
Yeah.
students, and what I'm seeing right now is like, sometimes I wonder, are you two people? Is this like one of those situations where you and your twin are trying to be a magician or something in the 1800s, and I'm meeting both of you, but I only think there's one. Like, what's going on? And so
Yeah.
what I want to talk about today, I'm not coming in with any preconceived notions of an answer. So I'm interested in the qualities that we're going to discuss. Is
Yeah.
what's the difference between those three, and how can you create a situation for yourself where, if you're in the middle, where you trend towards success rather than destruction?
Yeah. That's a really great topic. I mean, I can say from observation, this goes outside of teaching too. It's just in life in general. Like, I've had this moment, like meeting young aspiring illustrators who just got out of college, or like when I'm interviewing people, it's like there's just this thing. It's an unspeakable, kind of unmappable thing. It's really hard to pin down. But you meet these people where you're like, there is absolutely nothing that is going to get in your way from succeeding. And it's like you just get that vibe. And a lot of it has to do with like the quickness with which the person says yes, like to new things, to new ideas, to new challenges. It's like anything that's thrown their way, they're going to tackle and destroy and succeed at.
Yeah.
And sometimes not even succeed, but even that failure doesn't derail them.
Right.
So it's like I think that would be the big characteristics is like it's a lot of people call it being hungry, and I would definitely agree with that analogy because it's exactly like what you'd imagine someone who's starving, like they're literally starving for food, and they have like a little morsel of food placed in front of them, and they're gonna get that food. Like there's no way someone who's dying of hunger isn't gonna fight for that food. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like so there's this kind of eagerness and hunger that you can see in certain people and certain personalities. And it's usually met with those actions of like being quick to say yes, quick to take on challenges, quick to even take on challenges too big that cause you to fail. And then from failure, really quick to get up because once again, they're hungry. They don't have time to fail. It's a weird thing. And it's like, it's one of those things I don't think I've ever seen. I mean, I've mentored people to kind of have more of that, but it's one of those things where I don't know if you can teach people that. I think people, it's one of those weird areas where I think people kind of have it or they don't, and I hate that kind of thing. Being the type of person who really believes in hard work and self-reliance and stuff like that. But I have to say, like the longer I've been at it, the more I'm like, I don't know if you can teach that. Like I don't know if that one thing can be taught, the wanting it thing.
So
you can try to inspire it,
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't think you can teach anything.
Yeah.
So and so I would agree with you, but not because that thing is unique, but I can't teach somebody to have a positive attitude. I can't teach somebody to work hard. I can't teach someone to overcome obstacles. I can't teach someone, it's kind of like I remember talking to a bunch of people who teach writing, and they're debating whether it's possible to teach their subject.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing. Having said that, I don't think that you can teach stuff, right? Yeah. I do think that given the right situation, you can show someone that change is possible.
Yeah.
And show them the benefits of that change and show them that they're capable of that change. And then whether they choose to take that step or start on that journey is actually up to them. One class that I teach, I wrote it from scratch, and I'm really proud of this class. And one of the things that I did is the sequencing of the projects is in such a way that I take people who, and I tell them at the beginning, this may be the hardest thing that you do in your college career, but I promise you that if you are willing to work, that you will not recognize yourself at the end of this class because you will transform. And I can say that having taught that class for 3 semesters, 2 or 3 sections for 4 years, I would say about 80% success on that statement.
Yeah.
And here's what it is. The first project is just basic. It's just like learning basic stuff. And then the second project is almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
And what it is I just say, I want you to understand that people that have gone before you that are in this exact situation succeeded. Here's the proof of their success. Look, they did it. And if I show professional work, then the students somehow distance themselves from that and they say, well, I'm a student. I'm not a professional, so I can't reach that. But if I show incredible student work that's at a professional level, and I say, listen, these guys had the same prereqs that you had, and this project was at the same time in the semester as yours, nothing's changed. And then they're like, oh, okay. It feels impossible, but it's not. And then they do it, and at the end of that, it's crazy because I just tell them, hey, I want you to think back 2 weeks ago. how you felt about this, and I want you to look at what you just did. And every time you feel like something is impossible, I
Yeah.
want you to think, I did this project. And I have
Yeah.
had students years later send me an email, call me up, and say, hey, I know this sounds silly, but I just came up against this massive thing in my life. And my first thought was, hey, I did that second project in that
Yeah.
class. I can do this. And it's
Yeah.
fascinating to watch because literally every single person who put in effort succeeded in that project. And that was the catalyst to to go on and whether they continued with that is up to them. But that was the catalyst to to move on, and they grew into this position. And honestly, it's not because I taught them anything. It's because they put the pedal to the metal and they burned the candle at both ends, and they worked super hard and then reaped some success from that on
Yeah.
something that they didn't think that they might have been able to pull off.
Yeah, I had a few really good mentors in college that one of them taught an assignment, and the assignment literally has never been done correctly ever because it's impossible. It literally is impossible.
Right.
Um, and so they would say like nobody's really nailed this 100%, but here's some close successes.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through it, and like it was really obscure, like the way it's described. It's not really clear cut. There's a clear kind of pathway and a clear result that's wanted, but like there was no succeeding at it. And it's interesting because that assignment took me years to really fully appreciate, and realize like there was no success. Like I thought for some reason there was this weird success that you could attain. But what was interesting was the drive that put in everybody to like think outside of the box to try to kind of, it was a conceptual project. And I think that's the purpose of it. From talking to people who've taught that, because once I went on to get my MFA, I met a couple of people who taught that assignment and talked about it, like gave me a little behind the scenes on it. And it was kind of that, where it was like the idea is to get you outside of the box conceptually. There is no nailing it. It just gets you to think different than everyone.
Yeah.
And that's so important. It was an early illustration class, but it's so important for illustrators to try to come up with that aha moment, like that thing, that concept that you can get very quickly, whether it's like a visual juxtaposition or like a literal statement or a political statement, whatever it is. If you can have that extra layer where the viewer is rewarded by having this like conceptual, like mind meld kind of thing happen, you're really pretty successful illustrator at that point.
Yeah.
And you'll notice this across the board with like any top tier illustrator has that.
Yeah.
And that's something that's hard to teach until you have weird Socratic exercises like that. And then it's like you get in this mind space where you're used to kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and doing a lot of the practices that like Cory, you've talked about in depth, you know, where it's like you're doing like a mind map and you're throwing ideas out there. And it's like when you're doing marketing, it's the same kind of thing where you're like, you start and you think about pain points, and then there's this long period of just throwing stuff out, like a what do they call it in at Pixar? It's the blue sky moment, right? Where you're
Yeah.
just throwing out ideas, and like that kind of thinking, once again, is a real turnoff for anybody who doesn't really want it. But for some reason, if somebody really wants to achieve and to succeed, you give them like a carrot that's almost unreachable, and they'll do anything they can to get to that carrot.
Yeah.
And it's the weirdest thing. Um, but I agree with you. I agree about teaching because I don't feel like as a teacher, you're really teaching so much as just kind of guiding on a path. And really, it's the person who's traveling who picks the path. Like
Right.
you can't really force somebody to go into Mordor, you know, like you
Yeah.
can't force someone to kind of go on a journey that they're not willing to go on. But if they're trying to go on the journey, you can give them assistance like on the way.
Yeah.
And like to me, that's more of what I viewed. Even as a manager or a mentor to like any aspiring illustrators or anything like that, I always view it as more of like I will give what's like needed and what's wanted. and I'll give opportunities, but if they aren't taken, like I'm not going to hand them. And if they aren't taken, I'm not going to like press it. Like I'm not going to give too many opportunities of those moments, because it's like, once again, I'll give like a little opportunity and see how the person handles that. And if they take that, then I'm going to give them more and more opportunities to succeed. And it is surprising to me how many people you could hand them like a platter full of opportunity, and they're not going to take any of it. In fact, they're going to work really hard to like move back from the opportunity they already have,
Yeah.
like in front of them, and move backwards 10 steps. And it's a weird, interesting thing, and it's a very frustrating thing, but it's great because it means we have free will. But it can be very annoying when you're teaching people and you really sincerely care about their well-being, and you see them like shoot themselves in the foot. It's one of the most frustrating things I'd say in leadership, because I think if you're a good leader, you're empathetic.
Yeah.
And if you're empathetic, it's really hard to watch somebody like literally like hang themselves. It's like, it's just not, it's not a fun thing to go through. But it's a weird thing where I can't quite map what it is, because all of these people will have diverse backgrounds. So I can't say there's like a background connection with the people who want it versus people who kind of want failure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. It's like you'd think it was like, okay, the people who want failure had like some rough childhood and like all this other stuff, and like, but the weird thing is like, no, a lot of the people who want success have like a rough childhood and have like a lot of weird stuff, and then a lot of like there's no distinguishing factor that I've found, except it is amazing how far just being willing to say yes to things that you don't even know necessarily you can achieve, how far that takes you.
Yeah.
You
There,
know?
there, there have been studies done where they have found correlations to certain things, but it's not socioeconomic. But there are kind of certain things that are kind of common, but they still haven't really nailed down what it is. I want to go to the chats before we
Oh
get
yeah.
started on this episode. We asked everybody what motivates them. Peter says, as an artist and comic maker, doing more work always seems to lead to getting more done. The more I accomplish, the more I want to take on, if that makes sense. And that totally makes sense because, in my view of motivation, motivation follows work,
Yes.
and it follows micro successes, right? And so I don't actually believe this. I'm gonna not rant, but if you want to hear how I feel about the word passion, go look those series of videos up. But most people mistakenly say that person is passionate about that thing, or that person is driven to do that thing, or whatever. I wish I had that type of drive, when in fact it's not an innate, inborn thing. What it is that somebody chose to, against resistance, do something and achieve something, and once they achieved that thing, it felt good, and they wanted to do it more. The motivation actually follows the work, it doesn't precede it. And
Yeah.
so the more that you are doing, to an extent, because you can reach an envelope where you burn out and whatever, but more work begets more motivation.
Yeah, agreed. And more successes. Like it's bizarre, but I can think back, and I'm not going to name every time, but times throughout my art experience, like from being a young artist to like now, where there have been times all throughout my life for decades where I faced like these moments where I come to a precipice of my ability, and I'm faced with this like utter frustration and utter like feeling of just being inadequate, incapable, but seeing other people who are above that level, and just feeling so close, but like there's just a block.
Yeah.
And whenever I've faced moments like that and worked really hard on whatever the certain challenges were, like whether it was anatomy or trying to do things representationally or trying to break things down into like basic cartooning, or trying to figure out like perspective, and then from that like trying to figure out how to like do actual backgrounds with art and like have the figures not get lost, and it keeps going. The point being, like, whatever that challenge is, like typography was one of the last really big breaking moments for me where I was just butting my head against it and I always felt uncomfortable with it and stuff like that. And then I just tried and worked really hard, and I get to this point where once I overcome that hardship, and I've always described this as like leveling up in a video game. It's like you play the level over and over and over again, and then you finally beat it, and you get to the castle, and the princess is in another castle. But there is that moment of like, I beat it, I did it, and that gives you fuel for the next time that you're going to hit that mark. Because I think like being an artist is a lifetime of getting to the castle and finding out the princess is in another castle. Like there is no princess. Like you literally are on this forever voyage of like leveling up your skill. And then I think if you get to the princess, you're probably on your deathbed at that point. But the point being, there's a motivation that fuels itself from every time you level up. Like when you level up,
absolutely.
Then you can always look back and be like, I remember when I struggled drawing eyes that weren't like this, and then I learned a center line, and it like unlocked this magical mystery where now like I can draw a face where eyes are symmetrical even if they're on a tilt, you know.
Right.
Or I remember the first time I learned that like the head is like the body is pretty much symmetrical, and so there's a through line through the body. So if a head's 3/4, like you've got a much bigger side here than you do here when you're drawing it. And like just little moments like that where you hear it and you practice it and it's frustrating and it doesn't make sense, and then this moment where it unlocks. When you experience those moments, it's because you worked really hard. It's because you did a lot of drawing. And even the best people, like people who just innately draw well from day one, are going to face those trials, right? They're going to face those moments. They're going to get to a point where they can't do something and they have to just keep at it. And like I said, unlocking it, I think that's a really good point about motivation, because I do, from my own experience, it's been one of those things where you get fuel from it, you know? I think, okay, Pepper said motivated to keep going for my family. I want to get to the point where I'm a parent at home and drawing comics while they are still kids right now, just trying to pay for my adoption fees. Hey, that's good motivation, you know? I think well-being motivates us all, you know? Like just, and I like the desire to actually be doing what you want to do and making a living doing it. That's a good desire.
Yeah. And the fact that whether it's a family or something else, you know, like a greater good that is kind of hanging on it. I think that's really important, because for me, if I wasn't married and I didn't have kids, I'd probably still do a ton of stuff, but I don't think the stakes would be as high because I can live on almost nothing. You know, I've proven to myself that I can live on whatever I can fit on the back of a motorcycle for an extended period of time, which is, you know, and that's, you know, so if I need to, as an individual, if I need to go off the grid, you know, and kind of be not a member of society anymore, there's ways to survive that I've done. But that doesn't work with like a 10-month-old and a 9-year-old and a wife and a house, and, you know, and so like, that's good motivation to be a contributing member of society. This makes me sound like a really weird, horrible person, but like, I do find that it's grounding. Like there's kind of this feral nature in some of us. I don't know if it's everybody, but with me, I've been tempted by going feral, like, and just, disconnecting from people in general. And I've done it several times for very short periods of time. And it's very, tempting, but I really enjoy family and connection and society and friendships and relationships. And that is a huge driving factor. Pepper also said, I just like the creating thing in general. I hand make many items that I sell because of this. I've made several comics and zines due to the need to just create, and I can
Yeah.
totally understand that. I've said this over and over again, but if I'm not making something, I don't feel right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a commonality with most makers of things. I think there's this drive to just do it, and like that gets more into that thing that I was talking about that I think is kind of innate and not necessarily teachable. Because like what even if I went out, like I relate 100% with what Cory, what you were saying about going feral. I'm one of those people, like if I didn't have my family, I'd be in like a squalor, but I'd still be kicking out pages of my comics. I'd just be eating top ramen all the time. And like, you know, probably talking to myself and doing weird things, you know. But like the point being, like I'm really thankful for my family. Here's one thing I'd say I think that helps with is being targeted,
Yeah.
because to me, my time ever since becoming a parent has become so like it's small windows of time, and so those windows and what I do in those windows really has to count. Because if I'm going to spend 2 hours of my time, and that's the only 2 hours I have to really value what I'm doing. And like that's what keeps me from like I've even mentioned on this, like I don't own a gaming system. There's a lot of things that I haven't really invested in because I literally know I have this brief window of time, and then the next day I like my primary functions, like get my family provided for, you know, spend time with my kid, all of that stuff. So it's like anything on top of that, whatever I do has to really count. And so like that actually I think creates a sense of urgency, which actually can be really helpful, I think, for productivity as well. But it is interesting how much like if I took everything off the table, I'd still be making what I make because I
Yeah.
love making. Um, Abe said motivation can be like improving my art, like a Ryu thing sometimes. And so that's like a kind of like a master kung fu type thing.
Yeah.
Like you kind of perfect the art for the fact of perfecting the art.
Um,
And that's a pretty interesting thing.
yeah. And Daniel Pink, I believe, is the author who wrote Drive, and he breaks down several criteria that make motivation, and he did this big study on it. And one of the main contributing factors to somebody who is driven is that they have they can see improvement. And so if there's a constant challenge to improve, and he calls it mastery,
Yeah.
there's a whole book that backs that statement up. It's really fascinating. It also talks about autonomy, you know, the ability to choose your own path. And then I can't remember. There's two more. One has something to do with success or satisfaction, and I think the other one is challenge. But anyway, but yeah, but that idea of mastery and autonomy are really fascinating concepts, and I can totally buy into that because
Yeah.
if I can get if I can master something immediately, I'm not terribly interested in doing that thing anymore because I did it
Yeah.
already. But like art and writing and other things where it's like there is a level of mastery, and it's always just outside of your current reach, and
Yeah.
you move forward and get better, and then realize that there's more. Is cool. Um,
Yeah. For me, like just the Pandora's box that is comics is one of those things that the second I opened it, I've been stuck with it ever since because I feel like for a design challenge and a writing challenge and a drawing challenge, it's so complex the amount of angles you can take
yeah.
that I don't know if anyone has mastered it. And that to me is like really intriguing and fascinating and addictive, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. Victor says, my love for art and being able to tell a story motivates me and challenges me as well. That's why I love comic books. Of course, getting paid for what I love to do also motivates me, but it isn't the full driving force to my motivation. Storytelling. Another really good book. Who Brian McDonald wrote Invisible Ink, and then also wrote The Golden Theme. The Golden Theme. I was talking to Brian on Twitter several years ago, and he told me he describes Invisible Ink as the how, and the Golden Theme as the why. And the Golden Theme talks about how storytelling is like a necessary and intrinsic part of being a human. He just gives example after example. It's just a fascinating read. But actually, if you want a really good deep dive into storycraft, he is now producing a podcast where he's breaking down all those principles. And he's a consultant to major places, Pixar and others, and
Nice.
things. And so he teaches storytelling and everything. Anyway, great, really cool guy, and very, very reachable. He'll talk to you on Twitter and everything. But yeah, storytelling is huge. And I think it is one of the things that separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom is that we don't have a genetic memory where, like, it takes us about 25 years to be able to kind of stand on our own 2 feet, where our brain's fully developed. And a lot of the learning comes from stories that we hear. Like, the
Yeah.
reason that you wear a seatbelt is because your mom told you a horrific story one time. You know, basically, as human beings, we're born, we have several reflexes like the finger grab. If we feel wind on our face, we hold our breath, and we know how to suck on things. And other than that, we almost have zero intuition. Everything
Yeah.
else is taught via story. And,
Yep.
and so I love the idea of storytelling being a motivating factor.
That's awesome. I also don't mind the getting paid being a factor as
Yeah.
well, because like I wouldn't do what I do for a living if I didn't get paid. Um, and like that's a huge motivating factor in paid work, I'd say, is the pay. Because otherwise, like once again, um, uh, I've said this multiple times, but if you hire a graphic designer and say, "Hey, just do what you want to do," you might get like the weirdest, most experimental, awesome, crazy thing on the planet that you weren't expecting, because what they want to do and what you're hiring them to do are often two polar ends of the spectrum. Like maybe they're getting into, dismantling typography and playing with the grid, and like that, maybe that stuff isn't going to work for your ad.
Yeah.
So it's like that's I think a common thread with creatives too, where it's like paid definitely motivates a lot of people. It motivates all the people at Pixar. You cut out the paycheck, a lot of those people would stop working there. So
Yeah.
yeah. um although I would say like that'd be a failure to say that it's the only thing that motivates, and I think places that just motivate with pay tend to be not the best working conditions for creatives.
Right.
Um,
And there are easier ways to make money. So it's definitely a contributing factor, and I do think it helps like narrow and focus.
oh yeah,
But if it's the only factor, I would get into finance. I
yeah,
would
get
I
into
would
finance
do
or divorce law. You know what I mean?
yeah. There are easier ways to make a lot more money than that. But yeah, Squatchy is saying it's the escape from reality for me. Art has always allowed me to get away from everyone and everything, to be able to remove stress and pain and immerse myself in a different plane. Creating
Yeah,
something that moves someone or entertains someone or even yourself is everything.
yeah,
Yeah, I
100.
go ahead.
Oh no, no, no. I guess I kind of relate because I used to have this theory about art. I don't know how much I hold to it now, but that a lot of why artists create, especially writers, is they're trying to kind of find order in chaos. And
Mm,
so there's chaos all around you in life, and the one scenario where you have like kind of full control over the narrative is storytelling. And so storytelling is like a semblance of control and order in an otherwise chaotic world, which I'm kind of mixed on now, but I definitely think, yeah, like escapism is definitely a huge thing. And I think that's probably one of the first motivating factors for most artists. Like most artists were drawing to escape something. Like maybe it's like they chose to draw when everybody else was playing at recess, or they chose to draw when it was raining when everybody else did this. There's something about the escape of drawing that, like, you know, a lot of them chose to draw instead of playing the board game that everybody was playing. You know what I mean? There's something about that escape that I think, especially at a young age, that's a very huge motivating factor.
Yeah. And I also think Neil Gaiman has a lot of really good stuff to say about escaping into fiction. If you, what was the book? From the Cheap Seats, is a collection of his like speeches and his like forewords to other people's books and things. And a lot of it is very like pro reading, as you would imagine. But he also just talks about like the value of being able to escape, because the world is an absurd and ridiculous place where not a lot makes sense. And if we had maybe a global eternal perspective of it, where we could float above the earth and understand everyone's thoughts and feelings, we'd see the threads. But down here in the mud with everybody else, it just seems like a lot of the time random and cruel. And being able to create something that makes sense, is awesome sometimes. So, yeah. Peter said, I've had assistants, and my experience, it's those that wish to learn that I can teach. Those that are open to growth, to change. Those are the ones that I took on. It's the right attitude, and I do think this is the key. If you were to find like the common thread, I would agree with Josh. I don't think there's anything in anybody's background that you can really point to and say, this is a common thread. I mean, they've found really interesting things, like those that tend to innovate had a lot of Legos as children. There's weird little correlations like that. But I do think that the one of the main things that you can find, a lot of researchers today are calling grit, is what they're referring to, is this idea of no matter what happens, I have the attitude of determination, and I will make this. I'll make this happen. And so, and it really comes through in those three different people that we were describing at the beginning: the person who's determined to succeed no matter what, the person who's kind of on the fence and will sometimes succeed and sometimes fail depending on the right circumstances, and the person who's determined to just destroy everything around them and themselves. One of the main things is the attitude and their outlook on life. The first, the one that will succeed no matter what, their attitude is very hopeful. And it comes in a lot of flavors. Sometimes it's aggressive and competitive. Other times it's laid back and peaceful. But they believe that it's possible, that there is a way, even if they don't know what it is, and that they also believe that they're capable of finding that way. That with enough effort and direction, that they can figure that out. On the other side of the scale, those that always seem to be failing, and those that always seem to be not progressing or whatever, they are the most excuse-ridden people you'll ever meet. They have every excuse in the book. I call them like ready excuses, where it's like, I remember talking to a student recently, not super recently, but recently enough that I can tell this story and it's still pretty fresh in my memory. And I stopped the conversation and I said, I just want to point out that in the last 10 minutes, where I have done nothing but try to help you solve this problem, you have come up with an excuse to combat everything I've said. And I said, so I'm starting to believe that you actually like this problem and don't want to solve it.
Yeah.
That you enjoy this. And they were like, no, I'm just, blah, blah, blah. So this idea of like, it's never my fault. I have no accountability. I'm out of, I have no control. This idea that some people act and other people are acted upon. Those that act, those that are the actors, those that are the choosers and the doers, things happen around them and are variables in their life, but they don't happen to them. and then those that are acted upon, that they're kind of just those things that drift and are tossed to and fro in the waves of whatever's going on around them. Um, they're just victims of circumstance, no matter what the circumstance is.
Yeah.
Always victims. And then the ones in the middle just seem to be kind of unsure,
Yeah.
and given the right opportunity, they'll flow one way, and given the wrong opportunity, they'll flow the other way.
Yeah. And something that's important to kind of qualify here too is like I don't think we're claiming that everyone who succeeds is like a complete optimist because
Mm-mm.
like I think just looking at history, like one of my favorite people to read is like Lincoln, and he's one of the greatest leaders of all time in US history. And if you read that guy's own writing about his life, he was a depressive. He was like a very depressed individual who suffered from like bouts of like severe depression, like I mean manic depression.
George
And yeah,
Washington,
he was
similar.
one of the brilliant, thoughtful leaders. But there are some things that are common with what Cory was saying. Like he was hopeful of like a better world that he thought he could kind of help try to facilitate. He was hopeful for the future, even though he was a pessimist and was very depressed, somewhat situationally. But it's interesting to me that that doesn't even necessarily mean that you're Mr. Positive all the time.
Mm-mm.
And that's one thing I want to qualify because it's like I think there is that false perception too. Because I've met some really positive, terrible people, and like, and actually sometimes that's problematic, right? Because if you're talking to say somebody who needs to fix something in their art and they're super positive about their excuses, it's like you're still making excuses.
Yeah.
It's like the positivity or the negativity. You're not facing the reality of like what you could change to make things better. And
Yeah.
so there's a real big thing there. Although I'm a fan of positivity, but I just thought that was an interesting thing to kind of include as well.
I think by nature, I'm very cynical and pessimistic, and I think if I didn't actively engage in the world and go out of my way to try to make things better, um, I would be, I would put the Grinch and Scrooge to shame. Um,
Agreed. I
and
mean, not agreed with my experience of you, just related to.
Yeah, no, I caught the insult. I got it. No, I was kidding. No, I'm kidding. No, but what I'm saying is, I have found that my satisfaction and peace internally is directly proportional to my self talk. And
Yeah,
so if I allow myself to speak negatively about my efforts and about my accomplishments, um, then I achieve less. I feel horrible about everything, and the world comes to bat to back up the way that I feel about that. Um,
100%.
but if I allow myself hope, which I think is actually more difficult, a lot of people try to play this off that like if I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist, and it's like I've never actually met a self-proclaimed pessimist, but I've met a lot of pessimistic realists,
Yeah,
and the fact of the matter is that you are more vulnerable, and it is more difficult and takes more effort to have hope and optimism in the midst of the absurdity that is the situation that we live in. and
100%.
and I don't look at those people as people who are naive or rose-colored glasses or whatever, but I look at them and saying, hey, you are willing to be vulnerable, because somebody who says, for example, this is something that I have challenged myself doing. When I state outright what I hope I want to happen, I feel very vulnerable, because what
Me
if it
too.
doesn't what if it doesn't happen, Like, I would love it if this thing happens, and if I say that, my immediate natural response after that is to come up with a mitigation,
Yeah,
watering it down, trying to say all of the reasons that I would be okay if it didn't happen. When in
yeah,
actuality, I really do want that thing to happen, and I really would be devastated if it didn't. And I'm okay with
yeah.
being vulnerable about that.
So I think that's a huge thing. Is vulnerability would be a huge thing as well because like and hope actually and vulnerability are so interwoven. A perfect example is like, I still submit to things that I have every belief in the world are not going to happen. And every time I find out it's not happening is painful.
Yep.
Like every time. Anytime I hope, I'm met 9 times out of 10, probably worse odds than that, with disappointment because I did have high hopes.
Yeah.
However, like what's interesting is like the times in my life where I've forgotten to hope have been some of the most miserable times in my life. And one of the things that's a driving factor, especially as you get into leadership, when you're in leadership, you're faced with systems that seem unchangeable, and they're very frustrating. And the longer you're at it, the more frustrating they get. If you literally think that can't be changed, it can't be done better, there is no hope. And so I'm just going to pack it in and just like in my position, just take my paycheck, go home, that's where you're dead. Like, and you may not be dead. Like you might have a lifelong career that you're completely depressed in,
Yeah.
but the little pinpoint of hope that you can find in whatever place it is, if you can cling to that and use it as like a northern star or whatever to head towards, you'll find that like there is that weird time where the thing happens, and then imposter syndrome kicks in because you're like looking at the odds of rejection that you've experienced and you're like, well, no, this must have just been a fluke. But at least you're playing the odds. And like, and once again, it's like the point I think Cory's talking about and I'm talking about is like, if you're not playing the odds, you can't be surprised if you don't hit that little pinpoint of luck. If you're not in the ring, you shouldn't be surprised that you aren't going to have a knockout win. Yeah, you're going to get knocked out a bunch, but every once in a while you might get that right hook in and knock the person out and be like, I just won. That's crazy. That's the fight of making art. That's the whole thing with this industry. It's so competitive. It's so insane. People with massive resumes have terrible experiences finding jobs. Yeah. It's a flooded market with a lot of talent, like too much talent and too little work. And so if you don't have the tenacity to kind of keep hope while you're in the hunt, like to keep hope when you get that first client, you're excited because it's doing art, and then you realize it's doing like a catalog for like a spa or something, and you're having to redraw parts. You know what though? Like once again, there's the difference between the person who gets that job and is like, this is it, this is the end. And then the person who gets that job and is like, this is a window, this is a vehicle to the next thing that's going to get me one step closer to that little tiny pinhole of light, I really do think hope and vulnerability to even express hope is a massive sign of maturity in an artist. And definitely something that I've seen in every single one of those people who has that drive, because they have this absurd hope that they're going to get to this crazy place. Yeah. And what's weird is the people who get to the crazy place all had that weird hope. It's really an interesting phenomenon, but I'm glad you brought up hope and vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to call it. That's we're over an hour. So
good topic.
Yeah, that was a great topic.
Thanks to everybody in the chats for like chiming in and telling us all the awesome stories of like what drives you to create art, because it's always fun. And I always find it fascinating how much probably everyone in the chats, when they read everyone else's, were like, oh yeah, that's a driving factor for me too. It's an interesting thing that there's so many unifying threads, to people who are making things.
Yeah. And we didn't even get to our motivating factors just because everybody else's were so interesting, but maybe for another time. If you are watching this at a later time, leave us a comment on what motivates you and what similar characteristics you've seen in other people who seem to be driven to do beyond the minimum. And if you want to check out Josh's stuff, where's that button? There's the button. You can go to quarterlystories.com and you will see the work that Josh is doing that he is not required to do, that he chooses to do on his own and spends a ton of time doing that. You can check out my stuff at corykerr.com. And you can check out the podcast when it is updated at corykerr.com/48hr. And thanks for watching. You guys rock. Thanks for jumping in the chats. And we'll see you guys in a couple days.